I'll be speaking to Ann Wright, a peace activist with Code Pink, who has recently returned from a trip to Montreux and Geneva, Switzerland, where a group of women held a peace conference in parallel to the U.S.-sponsored negotiations. Ann is a retired colonel in the U.S. Army and a former diplomat in the U.S. Foreign Service who resigned her post in 2003 in protest of the decision to invade Iraq. Wright has been to Gaza many times and will also be talking about the project's Gaza Arc and an upcoming Code Pink trip to the Gaza Strip. At present, she is in San Francisco. Good morning, Ann.
Good morning, Stan.
In reading over the pages of the Women Lead to Peace Summit that was held in mid-January, there's the phrase, 3 days of constructive events and beautiful trouble. Could you describe what went on?
Well, Code Pink Women for Peace was one of the organizing groups of the conference called Women Lead to Peace, and various other organizations to include the Women's League, International League for Peace and Freedom, the oldest women's peace organization in the world, Madre, another women's organization that works all over the world in conflict areas to provide assistance to women, a Swedish group called Kavina, that does a lot of work in conflict areas. And we were there to provide a platform for Syrian women who had been selected by a group of 50 Syrian women that had been brought out of Syria to talk about peace and talk about their role in peace. You know, most peace negotiations are between the guys with the guns, and very seldom do the civil society get to be sitting at the table with the guys with the guns. And since women are over 50% of the population of the conflict area in Syria, we felt it was very important that there be not just women on each delegation, which usually there's a token one or maybe two, but that the voices of women should be heard as a delegation, really an apolitical delegation, a delegation that is just saying this violence has to end. You're killing all of our people. And so,
can I ask you who picked these Syrian women? Were they self-selected? Did American groups?
They were actually the 50 women were selected through a process of international organizations that still have been able to do work in Syria on all sides of it, and a lot of it really almost had to do with who could get out of Syria too. That it wasn't that it was just the perfect system for selecting women, but there were women from the Syrian government side. There were women from areas where the opposition is, and the various parts of the opposition. So it seemed to be a pretty wide selection of people. And then these women who, they hadn't seen each other in a long time, in over 2 years, many of them, because they're divided by the violence. Divided physically, that they just can't move in and out of all hours, where they talked out all of the issues that they had and then selected 10 of their own to be what we hoped would be a women's delegation that would have status at the second round of peace negotiations, which took place in mid-January. However, as some things happen, you're not successful. And indeed, the women's delegation was not seated at the negotiating table, nor did it even get observer status. There were 16 countries that were given observer status, but here you have a delegation representing half of the population of Syria, and they were not accorded observer status.
I see. Yeah.
But that didn't stop them, because we were able to get them meetings with the national delegations, the 16 national delegations. So they were telling their story behind the scenes and to the international press that was there. So it wasn't that this was a failure by any means. And it was a unique step where, to our knowledge, there's never been a time where there's almost been like a third party to peace negotiations, and that third party being women.
Hmm. Now, the group, the summit, called for ceasefire, humanitarian aid, and women's participation in the talks. So, of course, we talked about the women's participation issue. How about ceasefire? You know, that's kind of controversial in some quarters. Well, I've raised it, and a number of Syrians, will say, absolutely not. The other side must be, they're monsters and they have to be destroyed.
Well, that's the boys talking. And when you have the women saying, half of the population saying, this violence has got to end. It will end eventually. And do you want it to end with 200,000 dead, or do you want to have it end with 500,000 dead? So that's the position that these women are coming from, that it will never end. Well, as long as the violence continues, you can never get to a peace table. So the first step traditionally, and it's not just in Syria, it's in every place, is that you've got to have a ceasefire. You've got to stop the killing. You've got to stop the battlefield. And of course, the people, the side that feels it is not having an advantage, doesn't want it to stop until they get an advantage. We understand all of that. I mean, that's the way it happens in every conflict. But here you have the women that are saying, you must stop this. You've got to stop it now. There's been too much death and destruction, and stop it now. So they're very clear. And, the Syrian women are very strong women. And I think a lot of Syrian guys don't want to hear these women because, they don't want to be kind of beaten up by the women to stop wars. And that seems to be kind of human nature on the male side of it.
You had a demonstration in Montreux. Could you describe that?
Well, it was I wouldn't say it was a demonstration. It was a vigil. We wanted to be very, very careful on how we, the international community, came across on this. We wanted this to, that it was important to have solidarity with the women that was there and call for peace. And that's really all it was. We were silent. There was no yelling or shouting. There was no taking sides. It was a vigil for peace. And we used the black shrouds and the white masks and a silent standing there as symbols of the victims on both sides of this. So it was very powerful. There were actual demonstrations that were held by representatives of each side, both government side and the opposition side. But we did not at all participate with those. We had separate vigils just calling for peace.
Now, the delegation didn't make it to the negotiations even as observers. Were there reactions from the Assad government or the rebel and revolutionary groups to the vigil and your activity?
Well, we actually had people from each side that would end up wandering through the UN Plaza, the plaza that's in front of the UN building in Geneva, that has some very remarkable monuments in it, one of which is kind of emblematic of the UN. In the United Nations in New York, they have the revolver, the pistol that has its barrel that's tied up. And in Geneva, they have an artillery piece whose barrel has been tied up. Plus, they have a 3-story chair that's sitting there with a broken leg on it, which symbolizes the broken societies that are the UN is trying to help get peace back together. So on that plaza, that's where we would hold our vigils, and that's where the demonstrations for on both sides of the Syrian issues would have theirs. And as we would have our vigils, and there might be delegates that would be going into the UN building, they would come by, and actually nobody harangued us. They were there saying just thank you for being there for Syria, and it kind of undercut the what we thought what might happen, that either side might be very aggressive toward us and telling us we had no business to be there, but that's not what happened at all.
Now, since that time, the big issue, the war continues, but the big issue has been the starvation in the in Yarmouk camp and Homs and other places. Is Code Pink getting involved in that too?
Well, we still call for a ceasefire and open up humanitarian corridors. And that's all we're doing. We don't have a follow-on program as such. Although the organizations that are centered in Geneva, like WILF and Madre has another person that's there. They have been the ones that have been taking the lead more on the continued support for the Syrian women's delegation. And we are calling for opening up of corridors into all of these areas where there is malnutrition as a minimum and starvation happening in some of these places.
Now let's turn to Gaza. Last time we spoke was in September in Washington, and we were talking about Gaza's Ark. Could you tell us about that project and bring us up to date?
Yes, well, if you remember, starting in 2008, a group called, the Free Gaza Movement started sailing small ships to try to break the Israeli naval blockade of Gaza, and actually got several little boats into Gaza before the Israelis stopped all of those. And in 2010, there was a Gaza Freedom Flotilla of 7 ships, and then in 2011, 10 ships tried to go into Gaza and were not allowed to. The Israeli Navy impounded all of the ships, and rather than sending more, we decided we would renovate a boat in Gaza, a fishing boat, renovate it as a cargo boat, and then ask people from the international community to purchase goods that are still made in Gaza and export them on Gaza's Ark. The project is about finished. We've about got the boat renovated, and we anticipate by midsummer we'll be ready to sail. And we encourage the international community to purchase handicrafts that are still made in Gaza, purchase things directly from the vendors, and then they will, on a specific day, will have a big ceremony where they will bring all of the goods that have been purchased down to the boat, and then we will sail the boat out.
Now, let me ask a dumb question. What's the situation with exports from Gaza by sea? It doesn't exist, or what is the situation?
It does not exist. That's one of the really remarkable things where the Israeli government has been able to convince enough other governments in the world that the Palestinians should not have the right to directly export their own goods. And even though there's a 25-mile coastline that Gaza has, and a nice port, and goods used to be exported from that port years and years and years ago, but the Israelis have, as a part of squeezing the people of Gaza, this blockade, land and sea blockade, has meant that they have not been able to export by sea for probably at least 30 years, and it's something that we're trying to get changed. There have been initiatives by the European Union to say that they could inspect the ports of debarkation, like the port there, or they could ratify the port by land through Rafah. But no, the Israelis refuse to allow that, and then they limit the amount of goods that can be exported through the Israeli border. And it's primarily flowers and a few vegetables, but anytime the Israelis want to just hold up those exports by one day, it means that the produce will probably be ruined. And it's a very, very tiny amount of exports that the Israelis allow through their own border anyway.
Let me ask you a dumb question. I'm full of those. What is the reason for the siege now? I mean, I remember a couple years ago it was that they claimed that that the Palestinians had seized an Israeli soldier and were shooting huge amounts of rockets or missiles. Certainly that soldier is back in Israel, and I can't remember now, but since last year, I think the number of rockets has been insignificant. What do the Israelis say is the reason to keep 1.5 million people under siege?
Well, of course, their comments are that they're trying to protect the national interest, the defense of Israel. Of course, what we know what the issue is. They are trying desperately to break the will of the people of Gaza. They're trying desperately to break the will of the people in the West Bank, and they'll use any sort of inhumane methods that they can think up. And this idea of keeping 1.7 million people in an open-air prison where they are blocked in all directions, and then they send drones over. It's kind of like shooting fish in a barrel. They at will target Palestinians, and of course they say, like the Americans say, these are people that are threatening Israeli national security, as America says that the people we kill by drones in Yemen and Pakistan and Afghanistan are threatening U.S. national security. So they're anytime there's a top dog on any of these, that there are people that have more arms, that have more ability to put the squeeze on people that they want to leave, really. The whole issue of taking lands from the West Bank and putting such extreme pressure on the people of Gaza, it really is it is a push toward, on one level, genocide of the people in Gaza.
Before we leave before we leave the Gaza Ark thing, what has been the Israeli government attitude towards this? Have they said anything about whether they will actually let the Ark leave?
Well, actually, we seem to get the most publicity for Gaza's Ark from the Israeli press. They have articles on Gaza's Ark quite frequently, and of course they're coming from it from the Israeli side about how outrageous this is, and that any boat, and how illegal it would be for a boat to sail without Israeli permission. So we anticipate that the boat will be stopped by Israeli military between 2 and 6 miles out. But we intend to sue the Israeli government for taking the goods that are on board that ship. We'll take it to Israeli court, as the parents of Rachel Corrie have done. And of course, we know that their lawsuit against the Israeli government and specific individuals was not successful, but it raised the issue of whether or not the Israeli military can run over people with their tanks. This will test whether it will put back into the international press the fact that the blockade is still continuing. So it's to get international publicity for these continuing issues that we do these things.
Now, I did want to mention that there's been a lot of prominent support for this, including a number of Nobel Peace Prize winners. Could you name some of them?
Yes, well, the Marie McGuire from Northern Ireland, who has been on several of the boats trying to break the naval blockade of Gaza, and who has been thrown in Israeli jails for flying into flying into Israel to go to a Nobel Women's Initiative meeting that was being held there, and the Israelis refused her admission into Israel and the West Bank. So Nobel Peace Laureate Marie McGuire is one of our key people who, over the years, decades, has been supporting the right for Palestinians to live.
Mm-hmm. Now, good. And the site, so for people to learn more, what is the website?
Yes, the website is gazasart.org.
Great. Now, finally, about the trip Code Pink is planning in, I guess, just a couple weeks. Could you talk about its purpose?
Yes, we are going to be part of an international delegation. We have about 15 women from the United States that are going to join 85 other women from around the world to go to Gaza for International Women's Day. in solidarity with the women and children and men of Gaza. This initiative has been organized by a group from France, and they contacted us because we helped organize the Gaza Freedom March in 2009 and have taken numerous delegations into Gaza since 2009. So we are really looking forward to joining with women from around the world to attempt to go to Gaza. We don't know that we'll be successful. The new Egyptian government is not overly helpful. But unless we go to Cairo, and unless we're there, and unless we put pressure on person, you can be guaranteed you won't get in. So
the only way is through Rafah. Is that it?
That's correct. The very few, the Eretz crossing from Israel is set aside for UN employees and the very few diplomats that go into Gaza. So we will be going through the Rafah crossing from the northern Sinai, and hopefully we'll be allowed by the Egyptian government to go into Gaza.
Well, what about the question of the Israelis? At one time, the Israelis seemed to monitor people going across at that Rafah checkpoint and had a thumbs up, thumbs down capability. Is that still the case?
I'm not sure that is the case, but I would anticipate it probably is. The Egyptian government, I think, still has a lot of dealings with the Israeli government on these issues.
All right, good. Finally, just tell us Code Pink's website so people can see about all the great work Code Pink is involved with.
Yes, Code Pink is codepink.org, codepink.org, and we do have a one-day APAC, Occupy APAC event coming up, which will be on the Sunday of the APAC meeting, which I believe is March the 3rd. So anybody that can get down to Washington, D.C. for a one-day protest out in front of the APAC conference, we'd love to have you.
All right, well, thank you for speaking to me.
It's a pleasure, Stan. Thanks for all your good work and your continual work for the Palestinians.
All right, I've been speaking with Ann Wright of Code Pink. Thank you all for listening.